Hello everybody, my name is Psychopath. I welcome you all back to my next top 10 list here on YouTube. And this time, I'm going to be doing my first anime top 10 list on this channel. My top 10 favorite anime villains. Now when it comes to a villain, what makes a good villain, regardless of media, video games, anime, manga, cartoons, comic books, novels, TV shows, movies, villains come in all different shapes and sizes, different goals that they're trying to work towards, different looks, different powers, different reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. And this list was actually probably, of all my top 10 lists I've done, probably one of my most fun lists I tried putting together to try to come up with, to present a video top 10 list for all of you. And it's going to be my first of many, there's going to be more, anime lists here on my channel. And I wanted to start my anime top 10s with my favorite top 10 anime villains, because anime especially has so many great villains, so interesting, goals, powers, reasons, looks, backgrounds of villains. And I wanted to give to all of you my thoughts on my top 10 favorite anime villains. So let's get started quickly with number 10. Number 10 is going to be going to Light Yagami from Death Note. And yes, technically, some people out there would say he's not really a villain. But in essence, he technically becomes the major villain of the Death Note series. And when I watched Death Note, and a lot of fans out there pretty much watched it back when it came out and have been fans for a long time, I only recently got into Death Note within the last year and a half. And he became a very interesting character, and he basically was interesting enough for me to actually consider to be a villain. One of my favorite villains of all time in the world of anime, because he starts off as a protagonist. He starts off as a good guy, and as you watch that series, you slowly but surely see him go, to the dark side. When he gets the power of the Death Note and can start killing people off left and right, he really starts utilizing it a lot. And at first you think, oh, he has a goal in mind. He wants to kill off all the bad people so the world would be good and everything. But then at the same time, you start noticing he gets a god complex. And when people start suspecting him, he starts killing off people left and right to protect himself. And you start seeing him use this power that he started using for good in a way to hide his tracks and protect himself. He killed people he knew. He used people he knew. He killed people he knew. He tried anything and everything in Death Note to protect his safety, to protect his identity as Kira. Across the, in the world of Death Note. And it makes you want to hate him so much. As the series went on, I started to realize how much I hated this guy as it went on. He was semi-likable at the beginning, and spoilers, which this entire list will be spoilers, so I'm sorry. When he loses his memory and he becomes more of a good guy, yeah, that's good too. That's a pretty likable version of him too, because he forgets all about being Kira. But when he's Kira, before he loses memory, when he gets to the end and starts killing people off left and right, and just has this evil motive to him, even though he's not really technically being evil, but at the same time he is villainous because he's killing people off left and right. Even if they are bad, this god complex he gets really takes control of him. It makes him so despicable. I could not stand him at the end. And a lot of people would agree with me, when he killed off L, that took any decency away from him. When L died, that was a turning point in the series, and it made me want to hate him more, because L was such a likable character, and it made him legitimately the villain. It was kind of, he was on the edge at the beginning, but once that happened, he was legitimately the villain. And while he's not a full-blown villain, I consider him a villain enough and interesting enough, one of my favorites enough, to at least be number 10 my top 10 favorite anime villains of all time list. Now let's get on to number 9. Number 9 is going to go to Ragyo from Kill la Kill. Now, just like Light, she was a character that, as the series went on, I could not stand. She became so dislikable near the end of the series. What she did to her daughters, what she tried to do to the world with all the life fibers and taking over the world, and everything she did, trying to, killing off all her children or using them when they were babies to make this ultimate life form power and everything when she was younger. She becomes so dislikable, and she became a villain. And this is actually kind of a good sign of a villain when you desperately want to see them get beaten, see them get killed, see them get defeated. And Ragyo, by the end of Kill la Kill, when she finally gets beaten at the end, it was such a triumphant moment. Like in that series for me, because it was built up really well when she started being in the series, and she started getting doing all the stuff she did, killing people off and using all the people and using her daughters, and all the stuff was revealed about the past, about all the experiments she did. She's one of my favorite villains in that I liked her as a villain because she was so dislikable. I liked her because I disliked her so much, and that's something you might see more further on in this list. But she's on this list more so because, like I said, she's such a dislikable villain, and she was built up fairly well enough to the point that I wanted to see her beaten. And in my opinion, I don't know if you would agree with her or not, like, a good villain, is someone that you love to hate, or at least you love to hate in a way where you want to see him beaten. You just don't like them a whole lot, and you want to see him beaten in the end. You want to see them get their comeuppance. You want to see them beaten. And she defines that, because I could not stand her. And when she finally gets beaten at the end, it was such a happy moment and a good ending to Kill la Kill. Whether you like the series or not, in my opinion, I think it ended pretty well. And her defeat was a good moment, and it's also the build up through her character to the end, from the beginning to the end, makes me like her to dislike her, and she's my number 9 on this list of my favorite anime villains. Now let's get on to number 8. The Major from... I'm going to specifically say Hellsing Ultimate, because I've never seen the original Hellsing, not yet, but I'm going to say the Major from Hellsing Ultimate, because he is one of the creepiest villain characters I've ever seen in the world of anime. Just look at him. Look at his face. 99% of the time, he has this stupid grin. This stupid, creepy, smiling grin on his face. He never looks like he's scared or beaten or anything. Very unlikely. It happens a little bit in the series, but he always has that look because he always thinks he's smarter than you. He always thinks he's better than you. He always thinks he has the upper hand in the battle, in the fight. And from the beginning of him in the series until his defeat in the end, he was such a good villain in creepiness alone. And that's something I like about a lot of villains too, is when they can really creep you, that they make you uncomfortable. And seeing him sometimes, especially with the looks that he gives and how he presents himself, how he talks and stuff, it was freaking creepy as all hell. And just this leader that's in the background of all these evil zombie, Nazi people that come back from the dead to take over the world, and all his generals fighting for him, and he's in the background, basically just yucking it up, oh, we're gonna win, yay! And then when they finally get to fighting him at the end and beat him, it's not the same thing as the Regio situation where I wanted to see him beaten, I wanted to see her beaten so badly. I wanted to see him beaten, but at least along the way, unlike Regio, who becomes very, I could not stand her. I actually, while being creeped out by him, while he actually has this creepy atmosphere about him, he still is likable. He's a villain that I liked to like, and I still wanted to see him beaten because of how creepy he was, and the fact that he was a villain, and all the crap he did in the series to do crap to everyone. But at the same time, he was a villain that I liked. Not that I liked to the point where disliking and wanting to see beaten. He was a villain I actually kind of liked. And that's the Major from Hellsing Ultimate. My number 8. Now let's get on to number 7 on this top 10 list. Devin There from Magic Knight's Ray Earth. semi-classic anime out there. It's basically a semi-magical girl anime that's kind of in the realm of fantasy, so it's kind of like taking Slayers and giving it a dose of like Sailor Moon, magical girl type situation. And she is basically the villain of Season 2 of that series, so basically the major final villain, because the Season 2 was the conclusion to it. And she was like I said, another villain character, and this is... And I don't know what, like I said, I don't know if this to you is like what you like or not, but I like a lot of villains that hide in the shadows, that aren't really a major appearance-wise or a threat physical-wise fighting the heroes until near the end of the series. And you might see one or two more of those out there on this list, which I've already talked about the major, and Cogito was kind of like that too. But Devin There, she's like this mysterious, dark female figure that like is from the shadows, and she wants to destroy the world, and the main heroes have to defeat her to save this fantasy world that they were transported to. And she has that like you know, the evil, mysterious woman type presence to her, this like personality to her that's like she has everything under control, and she's very witty and like, you know, sly, and she's behind the scenes, like, controlling everything, and she wants to just tear everything apart and destroy the world, like, bring darkness upon the world and whatnot. And in Season 2, the world that they were transported to is essentially crumbling, falling to pieces and everything. After all the events that happened in Season 1, it's starting to really like, fall apart and be destroyed, and the heroes have to go save that world that they were transported to by defeating her. And she had like a cool presence to her, a cool character, demeanor to her, and for a classic villain, like, I mean, every character I've named so far was basically a newer, like, you know, since the 2000s. Like, this is like, she's like a 90s villain, so she's like the first classical villain, and there are going to be some older villains out here, it's not all new, but she was pretty dislikable. She wasn't dislikable like a Cogito, but she was more likable of a villain like the Major was, but she was so evil, and she was so cool, and I found her to be a fairly cool villain that was well built up enough, because it tells you basically in the show why she is this major villain, how she came to be in the second season after the events of Season 1 and stuff like that. And she was a pretty likable villain, and that's the reason why, while she's not one of my favorite villains of all time, that's the reason why obviously she's number 7, she's on the list because I liked her so much. And I know it's kind of contradicting myself here. Like, I like some villains because I dislike them so much, and some villains because I like them so much. But it's villains in general being compared to each other. And I know that might be sounding confusing to some people, but it's my list, and I basically put on who I feel are some of my favorite villains. And some villains I like because I dislike them, and some villains I like because I like them. Or some villains I like and dislike at the same time. And Devin There was a pretty cool villain for Magic Knights Ray Earth. And you should check that series out. It is a classic, and you can find it on Hulu. So, there you go. Okay, let's get on to number 6 on my top 10 favorite anime villains of all time. The controversial choice, because I might get a lot of hate for putting this guy on my list. And putting this series on my list in general. Death Gun from Sword Art Online. And no matter what you think about Sword Art Online, if you think it's overrated, you hate it, you do not like it, or whatever the villains are, and whatever the characters are, and whatever the story is, for me at least, Death Gun was such a cool, mysterious, creepy villain. Now, like in Season 1, people can say what they want about Sword Art Online, first season, second season, anything in general, whether you like it or you hate it or whatever. I like Sword Art Online, and yes, that's a controversial opinion apparently in the anime community. Is it one of my favorites of all time? Not really, but I enjoyed it for the characters and the story. It did keep me interested, especially when I watched it on Toonami. It kept me interested every single week. But like I said, at least with Season 1, I could agree with one thing, is I feel Season 1 of Sword Art Online was vastly rushed. And the villains weren't all that interesting either. Like, the dude, Heathcliff, or whatever, the guy who created Sword Art, he was built up decently well, but his payoff was not all that great. The villain, Sugo, I think his name was, he was okay. He was built up decently well, not as much as, like, you know, Heathcliff or, like, the Kayaba, but basically he was still he got a decent payoff. Like, he wasn't built up as well as him, but it was a reversal. Like Kayaba was built up well and didn't have that big of a payoff. Sugo was not built up that well, but had a decent payoff. One that I think had a good build-up and a good payoff was Death Gun, because when they started going to Gun Gale Online and all these players were dying, and then Kirito was brought in because, oh, how is he doing this? Is it able to kill people in real? Are they able to kill people in the game, and figure out why? And him being this major mysterious character that is cloaked, this scary ass mask that he has right here, this really creepy mask he has right here, and like he has like this mysterious demeanor. He just like puts fear in people when he's there. He's not very much seen around people in general, so he's very like mysterious. Like they built him up well, making him mysterious and a creepy figure, creeping out Kirito and like creeping out the world, and this mysteriousness about him. And how is he doing all the things he's doing? Because it's likely him that's the one that did it until they figure out it actually is him. And then when they fight him, when Kirito fights him at the end, the payoff was actually pretty good. The final battle was actually pretty good too. And I liked him as villain. He is my favorite villain from Sword Art Online because he had good build-up, he had good payoff in the final battle, he was a cool personality, he has a cool look to him, and like the creepiness, like I said about the Major, he has a creepiness to him. Not as creepy as the Major, but he's still creepy in his own different, mysterious, dark, evil ways. And he fights pretty cool too, and he just has like, there's something about him that I actually like that drew me to him and actually made me, when I was watching Sword Art Online 2, when I was watching the second season, that actually drew me to actually liking the character. And he is my favorite villain from Sword Art Online. As controversial as that is, you take it with it as you will, but he is my number 6 on this list. And let's get away from the controversial opinion by jumping into the top 5. Number 5 being Cogito from Tenshi Universe. Specifically the Tenshi Universe version. There are different variations on him in the shows, because all the different Tenshi Muyo shows, but let's get on to him in Tenshi Universe. And this is a villain that I felt was built up well enough because he was not even in any battle with Tenshi until the end. He was the major villain throughout the entire series. And most Tenshi Muyo shows, either if they don't have a major villain throughout the entire series, they have specific little arcs, specific little sections of the show that are dedicated to certain villains. And that was pretty much a major part of like the OVA of the Ryo-Oki of the original Tenshi Muyo. But when it came to Tenshi Universe, Cogito was the main focus of the show. And he was built up from pretty much, maybe not episode 1, but early on in the series as the major threat and the major enemy of that series. And like I said, that's a major thing that interests me as for a villain that's not up close fighting the hero all the time. They mastermind stuff from behind, pull the strings from behind, do all the stuff from behind the scenes, messing with the heroes until the final battle happens. And that's mainly what happens with him, trying to take, Tenshi's grandfather's position, pretending to be him, and pretending he's someone he's not, and this whole mysterious background and like connection between him and Tenshi's grandfather, and the history between them fighting in the past. Just his whole demeanor, how cool he actually looks, and how much of a threat he actually presents to Tenshi in the final battle. Cogito from Tenshi Universe is my number 5 favorite anime villain. Now let's get on to number 4. Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. Fairly obvious choice. I had to include Dragon Ball Z villain on here because I do like Dragon Ball Z. It was one of my favorite animes growing up. It still is one of my favorite animes now. Not as much as when I was younger, but I still love Dragon Ball Z, and even GT. And I had to think of who was my favorite villain from that series. And the cliche choice is Frieza, but it's Frieza. My favorite villain is Frieza because he is such a major threat through a lot of the series. Because even though he's not present in the Saiyan saga, he is still behind the scenes controlling Vegeta and Nappa. Then they go to Namek and fight Frieza and his army and the Ginyu Force and all that. And like this mastermind that takes over planets, that takes over galaxies, that he feels he's unstoppable. He has that like presence and personality about him that he cannot be beaten. He's this all-powerful entity that just rules the galaxy. And he's pretty cool. And yes, I was contemplating putting Cell here because Cell is a really awesome villain too. But I was like, you know what? I wanted to only include one. I didn't want to double dip. I wanted to only have one or the other. So I don't want to double dip in this. It's a one per franchise rule. When it came to this list specifically. Cell was cool, but Frieza is a more memorable villain from Dragon Ball Z. And like the battle between him and Goku on Namek was freaking awesome. Him coming back as Mecha Frieza fighting Trunks was really awesome. And then, you know, Resurrection of F movie was pretty cool in his golden form, and just everything about him. He's a threatening villain that actually pretty much, you know, he kills Krillin, he kills people, and he's just this major threat to the series that was, I think, after, you know, when it became Dragon Ball Z, everything became a lot more serious. And even though the first major threat probably would have been the Saiyans like Raditz, Nappa, and Vegeta, their threatness level to Earth was not as major as Frieza, who was majorly a threat to the entire galaxy. And when Goku finally fought him and everything about him and the major battles they had, he was a cool villain. Whether you liked him or you didn't. And he's my number 4. Now let's get on to my number 3. We are finally in the top 3. Number 3 is going to be Medusa from Soul Eater. She falls exactly into the same realm as the likes of a Death Gun and the Major. She is a creepy boss. And if I had to, between those two, the creepiness factor I would technically relate her more to would be the Major. Because of, you know, how I mentioned when I talked to the Major, like he has like this creepy face and he has these expressions and just his presence to him. Look at that. Look at her face. When I watch Soul Eater, whenever Medusa made that creepy smiley face that she always did, it did give me chills. It was creepy as all hell. And like, it's another factor where she's like intimidating, not just for what she does, but for how she looks and how she presents herself. Because she is a creepy character, especially in the facial expressions that she does. And she's not even the major villain of the series. She was more of, like you said, she's not the major villain of Soul Eater, but compared to the Kishin, you know, the major final battle of Soul Eater, she was more of a major villain, I think, to the series as a whole than he ever was. Because her final battle, the build-up to her final battle, was well done, well built up, and a nice payoff. The Kishin was built up decently well, sort of, and the final battle was kind of eh. But Medusa was so interesting because she was so threatening. She was a major threat. She was able to get under the eyes of everyone else by pretending to be someone she wasn't. And then she shows her true colors and she becomes a major villain later in the series. She's creepy as all hell. And that was my number 3. Let's get on to number 2. Makishima from Psychopath. Makishima from Psychopath was such a freaking badass. He was so awesome, so mysterious, trying to go against the civil system and, you know, taking people out, doing his own thing, try to control people and do his own little mission, that whatever he was doing. You know, he had this cool presence. So he worked under the civil system. He worked under the law. He was able to mess the system up because he wasn't affected by it. And he was such a, you know, like I said, a badass, because he has that cool presence about him where he is a major threat, but he does seem to also at the same time be vulnerable, because he's not like a person that can shoot energy blasts out of his hand or be able to turn into a super form or just be an invincible demon-like creature. He's a normal human. And he's basically like a big giant... To put it in simpler terms, he's basically a serial killer, basically, if you really want to think about it. Especially when he kills the one girl, which is the scene right here. That was a turning point in the series, really, really interesting. And he was built up so well because he was throughout the entire series as the major villain, and, you know, the heroes all wanted to go after him. It's like, what can he do? How far can he go? How evil can he be? And then the build up into the field at the end when he gets beaten and gets killed, he was such a delight to see. He is another villain that I liked to watch. And he is pretty much the only villain on this list that, quite frankly, I was actually sad to see die. He is like the only villain that I was sad that actually his outcome had to be him getting shot and killed. To have him be dead. He was so likable, I did not want to see him die. And there's a villain there too. Like I said, people like Ragio and the Major and all that stuff, I wanted to see them beaten, I wanted to see him killed, I wanted to see him destroyed. Makishima was different. He was so likable to the point where you did not want to see him killed. At least I don't. I don't know about you guys out there. You fans of whoever else watched Psychopaths, like, were you the same way? But that's something I want to know in the comment section. Did you want to see Makishima die, or, you know, were you sad when he died? Because I quite frankly was sad. Like, he was, I mean, all the stuff he did, he's not a likable person. He's not a good guy. He goes out and he kills people and he does stuff like that. But you see more and more as you're watching on, like, the reason why he does stuff and how he does the stuff. And it just, quite frankly, kind of is sad in the end when you actually see him die. Now, before we get to number 1, here are a few honorable mentions for other favorite anime villains that I have. They may have not been in the top 10 list, but they were this close to being on, some of which were closer than others, but they all are some of my favorite anime villains of all time, and I'm going to present to you right now my honorable mentions of favorite anime villains. Knives from Trigun, you know, Vash the Stampede's brother. He was pretty sadistic and crazy and built up decently well. The connection, brotherly relationship between them in the final battle at the end, the final gun-slinging battle at the end, was pretty cool. Naraku from Inuyasha. Pretty cool villain, mysterious, kind of behind the scenes, although he gets more involved than some of the villains I mentioned on the list. And major threat and his backstory. He's just an overall pretty cool villain. Esdeath from Akame ga Kill. She was actually pretty threatening and an interesting character, more so than the whole king ruler dude and all the other villains in that series. She was actually semi-interesting. Not like Dog Girl, who I hated with passion. I would never put her on this list. Forgot her name too. Esdeath was at least cool enough for me to want to put on. Aizen from Bleach, pretty interesting villain, almost like a god complex too, kind of like I said, like Yagami. He just wants to get like the power and rule and everything. So, yeah, there's Aizen. That's all I really can say about him. Cogito, this is the Cogito from the original OVA Ryo-Okyu series. He's not as cool as the Universe one, but he has his interesting personality and characters, and he has his own little story arc that actually makes an entertaining part of the Tenshi Universe. Not the Universe show, but the universe in the span of all the shows. And he was still enjoyable and interesting. Not as much as the Tenshi Universe one, but still enjoyable. Minos from Heaven's Lost Property. I wanted to see this asshole beaten so badly. I wanted to see him get his comeuppance. He was so, like, I'm up here and you're down there and you can't get to me, blah, 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 I'm evil. Ugh. And you never get to see it. Never. The series never beats him. The series never, the anime never has him get beaten. And it drove me crazy. In the manga they did it, but they never can beat him in the anime. Orochimaru from Naruto, he was a pretty cool villain, and that's all I really could say. He was threatening, creepy, in the shadows as well as on the field fighting the heroes. He's Orochimaru. Next one. Hendrickson from Seven Deadly Sins. A pretty cool villain, pretty well built up, like turncoat type, turn against like his team and using everyone, getting dark powers. The final battle with him is really awesome. And he was interesting. He was fairly intimidating throughout the series, but not on a full-fledged, like, creepy, evil, like, super intimidating effect. More like a down-to-earth type of thing. Hiroto from Sekirei. Another person, just like Minos, I wanted to see get his ass kicked. And they never taught! using all the the Sekirays and all this stuff, the Sekirai plan, and he never gets his comeuppance in the anime because we don't have no season after season 2. Marek from Yu-Gi-Oh! Because look at him, it's Marek. He's awesome. Another one, Senshui from Yu Yu Hakusho, because he was one of the more interesting villains. I know the Dark Tournament was its own thing, and I love the Dark Tournament too, but I think Senshui was more of a relatable villain, a good guy turned bad because of past life, past experience, like his life growing up. He was an interesting villain, and he was a major threat. And there you go. And that is it for my honorable mentions. Let's get on to what my number 1 is. Drum roll, please. Number 1 is Queen Beryl. Ta-da! Okay, now here's the reason why Queen Beryl is my favorite anime villain of all time. She was first off one of the first anime villains I ever basically became a fan of. Obviously, growing up with Sailor Moon, like she falls into the category, like I said, of villain behind the scenes that doesn't get involved with the heroes at all until near the end. She's basically like puppeting her minions throughout the entire series, and she's barely a major threat because she's the first major villain of the Sailor Moon series. And I'm mostly talking about the original. I haven't watched too much of Crystal yet, but it's the same character, so I'm basically talking about Queen Beryl in general. But Queen Beryl, she just has this intimidating factor, this ruler of I can control everything. I'm going to take the silver crystal and I'm going to destroy this and do this to this and take over the world with this. And here's my generals, here's all my monsters, and you guys can all take out the Sailor Guardians and kill them because they're pests and they're getting in my way. That's one of my favorite villain archetypes. Mastermind controlling their entire army of enemies. And she's iconic to me because Sailor Moon was one of the first anime I ever got into, alongside the stuff like Speed Racer and Dragon Ball Z. Grew up in the 90s, especially when it was Toonami and late 90s Cartoon Network. She was just such an interesting villain. She has an intimidating look and the presence about her when you see her in the series. It's cool. And the final battle with her and Sailor Moon, the entire ending to season 1 was really freaking awesome, and it's one of my most memorable, nostalgic moments in my time as an anime fan back when I was a kid watching that, and then watching it years later when Viz finally dubbed it again, redubbed it, unedited and everything, and it was still awesome. It was, and as much as people want to say whatever they want to say about the Deke dub and everything, I thought the voice actors were still pretty good. And as a kid, you don't really care much about this stuff anyways, and still to this day, I still think it's not a bad dub. It's just more censored. Not as censored as a 4Kids thing, kind of dub censorship, but still kind of censored. But the voice actors were still pretty good, and they still did a pretty good job. And I still enjoyed it when Viz did it, because Viz, does good dubs. And Queen Beryl was, the reason she's my favorite is because she's so nostalgic to me. One of the first anime villains I really got into watching and seeing. And she has that archetype of mastermind that I really like, and she's a villain that you love to hate and also love to love because she's interesting, but you love to hate because she's such a douche. And she's so evil, and you want to see her get beaten. And that is it for my top 10 favorite anime villains. I hope you guys like this list. Put in the comment section what you guys think. Do you agree with any of these choices? Who are your favorite anime villains? Put in the comment section below and we could discuss it there, have some fun, talk about all different anime villains from various animes we watched and whatever. And I hope you guys liked it. And that's it. Peace. Please subscribe if you want to. I hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll see you all later in my next video. Bye.